Hi everyone. As you know, I'm Dinah. I'm from Oceanside, Vista, North County, San Diego. Wasn't born here, born in Ohio. My dad, like many folks in California, especially in San Diego, joined the military and was stationed at Camp Pendleton, where I spent most of my childhood, which is in Oceanside, a military base. And then the second half of my childhood, I was raised in Vista, which is like literally 7 minutes apart from each other, depending on what side of the like boundary line you're on. But when I was younger, it was called Tri-City. It wasn't called North County or Vista, Oceanside or Carlsbad. It was Tri-City because it was basically no one stayed. People were stationed and then they left, So I'm one of those families that stayed behind and saw so many changes in my community. Um, I'm Gen X, just FYI, so that helps put a lot of things in context in my approach to curating or just like relationship building. We talk on the phone. We were like at the hybrid generation, so talking on the phone was very important for us. Is something we ran home to do, to call like a boyfriend or a friend, and you had a limited time to communicate with anyone. So you will learn that my generation culture has a big influence on how I curate programming and art shows at our space at Hill Street Country Club. I got my BA at UC Riverside, art history and art administrative. I'm not a big art history wonk. That's not my yayas. I love art history because I use art history as a way to understand dynamics in history and social environments. Art history is really not some thing that I glorify as something, oh, this beautiful art, this period. I don't do that at all. That's not my vibe. I literally use art as a way to like listen or tell stories. There's a picture of me right there. It's painted by my good friend and artist, Terry Sintabar, and is labeled as persistence. And that I didn't think about it for a minute, but now reflecting on like my couture practice, yeah, I am pretty persistent because I have to be resourceful. I come from a lower class background. I'm a single parent, so a lot of my curating work is centered around social issues and economic issues. If you're ever, wondering like why there's so many folks who are service workers, like, well, majority of service workers are artists and they don't have spaces. And if they don't have spaces, who else is seeking them if they're not in museums or galleries? And I'm on that level, and those are the artists that I work with. I've been heavily involved in political organizations, from Democratic Party to like progressive parties to all kinds of like political activism. Once again, I work with artists who are working poor just like me, and our issues are social related, and they're political related. If you want things to change or you want to improve people in your lives, people in your life who have an impact on you, you stand in solidarity with them. So my art curation is not just like for all the pretty things, but it's politically motivated. I want to have conversations. I'm all about creating critical mass. And I have two very expressive humans. I have a teenager and a 7-year-old. So I'm constantly going between different like personalities, which is probably why I'm really good with working with artists. And you see here, I have artist, personal, communal, and universal, but that is the message that I curate by. I truly believe artists have a right to be vulnerable and honest with themselves. They could choose to share that direct message or not, or create it in nuances in their art. But I believe if you give an artist the space to practice their autonomy and not follow institutional rules and say what that's been like circling in their head forever, their personal message is a communal message, because not one person is special in this world. Like, we all share similar issues and emotions and feelings. Like, there's nothing unique to me. I'm 47. I think I've heard folks go through similar situations throughout my life. And like, even with artists, and even though some of us come from different backgrounds or we arrive to an intersection, we all had a similar experience that was created by the universe, like with the economy, with, your healthcare, or with, climate change. Like everyone's affected by these universal issues. We just have our personal experiences in a community. These are a few of my favorite exhibitions. I can't believe they didn't show everything, but here's a few of them. A lot of my work is centered around creating space for conversations, accessibilities. I said that already. I believe that we need more spaces, and I believe artists play a dual role in civic identity and critical mass. And I believe art is an opportunity for us to like have the hard conversations that we cannot have verbally with each other. And artists play an important role in storytelling and bringing people to a safe space. That way, I don't know, like I always think about how art can either piss people off or have people reminisce. I don't know, there's just so much like power behind the language of art. So I'm a big fan of Grace Jones because she was so avant-garde. She was like what Madonna wanted to be. And there's a whole nother like dynamic to that. But she has this famous quote that I live by: I do what I feel when I feel it. And when I think about curating, I don't come from an academic background. Um, it's really because I'm working with artists that come from like the same class level as me, and we are having relationships and conversations about the work and the world that we live in constantly. And from my understanding and my education, art played a heavy role in society. It wasn't just a place, it wasn't just like a museum space or a gallery space. It was embedded into like civic identity from like how your cities were planned, from education. Art played a multi-layer role in our world. So I don't really see myself as a curator. I see myself more of a like organizer and a builder. Um, I just believe that my work is not to manage artists or oversee their work or select their content, but get them to a place where they can be honest and ready to let go of their work and share it with the public. Also, I start all my like coutural practice with a relationship. I have a very transparent approach to starting that conversation with artists. I'm very honest about my resources, like where we're focused. I want to make sure that artists that work with me, they know that it's a choice, because it requires a commitment of accountability and honesty that is very hard to find in a lot of institutional spaces. Um, and one thing I think that has impacted my work is, I'm from Oceanside and Vista. Oceanside and Vista for a very long time did not have a museum. Oceanside Museum of Art is there now, but it was not there in the 80s and the 90s. It started happening after I graduated from college. And so growing up in a small town, it's not small anymore, but like growing up in Oceanside and Vista, the only way you had access to art is if you were part of art club on like your public school campus. And that experience was very limited, because if you couldn't draw a horse, who's going to put you in the, like, who's going to consider you an artist? That was a time where folks were still going by the canon. Like, you have to be a great draftsman, a great painter, to be an artist. And I was very conceptual. I like building things, or I like discussing art. And there was no place for that where I grew up in Oceanside and Vista in my youth. It wasn't until I moved to LA and went to college and I experienced museums and galleries where I understood like, oh, there's another way to like practice art. You don't have to be the best draftsman or a sculptor. You can actually be a curator. You can be a gallery owner. You can be a conceptual abstract artist. You could be an organizer that creates programming. And that changed like the world for me when I moved to like LA when I was 18 and 19, being exposed to like the art economy and art jobs. I had no clue that exists until I was like 18. So when I came back to North County, it was very similar. Like the museum was there, but very few people didn't know it exists at the time. And so my curating start began with building and organizing. Um, I build and organize a exhibition, not exhibition, education department for the museum with my mentor, Julia Pfister, and my co-founder, who's in the picture right there, Margaret Hernandez. We both worked at the museum, and we worked with youth, with docent tours, and we had this tiny little like utility closet, and that was the art department. I mean, that was the education department at the time. And I would just remember like students would always ask us the same three questions, like how do artists get paid? What do artists actually do? And can we take materials home? And that was like the ongoing three statements that fifth graders would tell us when they visit the museum. And that was when me and Margaret were just like, hey, we need to organize and create an education department for the museum. And in that process, we learned that it was better for us to have our own institution because we were getting a lot of no's from the institution. And we created our first event. And that first event, we had over 20 artists from the community who all were young, diverse, didn't have a place to exhibit or like even gather for art. And that's when we realized like, hey, like we had such a great turnout. They're like, hey, we want to keep doing this. And so like I fell into curating as an organizer and a builder. I was just trying to build a space where like young folks who were like me, who didn't have access to art, can have a place to visit art, learn art, and express themselves, because I saw that that was a void that was missing in my childhood in North County. And that event just like changed the world for me and my business partner. That's when we started building and organizing art shows all over town. We didn't have a space for almost a year and a half. And then we had our first space. And in that first space, that was the first time we had to pay rent. The picture that you see of me and Margaret, that is in our first space, and that was an artist alley. And it was adjacent to the museum, but there was still no synergy or pipeline happening between an art gallery and a museum space, because during that moment, a lot of folks didn't in that community, in our community, didn't understand what we were doing. I mean, if you were in San Diego or LA or New York, you knew it was an art gallery. But in our community, it wasn't seen as an art gallery. It was seen like, okay, what are they trying to do? Even though we were like a block away from a museum, we were constantly educating our community about the purpose of art spaces and inclusive art spaces and spaces for youth to learn and to exhibit and express themselves. And curating for me, Margaret, started off with just educating our community about the purpose of having an art gallery space, because at that time, no one really understood the function. And so it wasn't an opportunity for me to sit down, do research, and do these like elaborate exhibitions. I literally had to humble myself and put like my college degree to the side and meet my community where they were at. And that started with local artists who did not have a place to exhibit their work. And those were the artists I worked with. A lot of the artists in North County were exhibiting in like cafes and restaurants, wherever a business owner would say yes to them and let them put their art on the wall. So me approaching them with a space and giving them the opportunity to like expand what they started into a solo exhibition was literally like a whole new experience for my community, for the younger community, not the older community that were visiting the museum, but those who had less, and that shaped the way I curate. I curate from a community. I meet them where they are. I understand the limited resources and like not having access to like multiple museum and like creative studio spaces. Like, how do you expect our audience to know what you're doing if they didn't grow up around it? And I took that as a responsibility in our curating like process to create programming centered around exhibitions, centered around the artist's like personal, communal, universal message. It's very important for us to have these relationships because we're in a community where folks don't regularly go to galleries on a Saturday afternoon. That's just not a culture. And it took a lot of us meeting our community where they were at. So we still had to do offsite programming. We couldn't just sit in our cute little gallery space and hope that people see us because we posted on Instagram or someone wrote an article about us. We still had to be physically active in our community. And that required us to be involved with our local government, our local like business chamber, we had to know what was going on in our community constantly, so to see where we can fit in and provide opportunities for our folks in the community who didn't know they exist. So our community like exhibitions are really about like not just showing off pretty things, but it's really about educating our community to like be open to having conversations centered around art. So at Hill Street, it's not me curating shows alone. I'm never by myself doing anything. And because I'm constantly trying to figure out what does a new art institution feel and look like for a person like me who's been in and out of museum spaces and gallery spaces and didn't fit the mold, I understood that I had to create a space for someone like me at my class level. And not just that, someone who looks and has like the complexities of living life in a world where you have to work every day to pay your rent. So my gallery space highly relies on in community like practice. And when I say in community, it's not just like, okay, we're in community together and we're going to do this art show. It's like, no, I'm in solidarity because I believe what you believe in. We're both striving for liberation. We're both striving for this art space that doesn't have all these rules and these admin guidelines just to be creative. So at Hill Street, we practice a more in community coutural practice. So it's not just myself that's choosing and saying and managing. There's so many women and queer folks on our collective that all have input in every exhibition. We sit together, we look at work together, we listen to artists. Not only that, but when we go into our relationship with the artist, it's all in a commitment that we're gonna be like honest throughout the whole process. So when the show happens, there's no surprise. And we're more like resourceful for the artists. We're not managing them. We're providing our skill set to like expand on what they're exhibiting and to also educate our community on the artist's message and their artwork. So when I say in community practice, it's folks that are in solidarity for the institution that we're creating together that's not like any other, that allow us to have autonomy, that allows us to fail. Also to like be honest, like if you're feeling like you can't create work or anything like that, we have a very like communicative practice in our space where artists who can have family issues or feel overwhelmed and stressed because we understand that like we live in a society where we have to work these jobs to keep up with the cost of living. And it's very difficult for us folks who are coming from a lower class to keep up with institutions at a full calendar pace and capacity when our resources are limited. So we give each other grace to pause and rest. It's not like any other like it's not like any other experience that you will have where, if you have to rely on a family member to watch your child, or you have to rely on a family member to help you go get groceries. We have a very similar practice at Hill Street. So when I'm curating shows, it's not just my final say. I literally am just a vessel as a curator. It's my role to listen to artists. It's my role to find those resources. And it's my role to make sure that I convey what I'm listening to with their approval before we release it to the public. So when I say we practice in community it's about, you share principles, you share ethics, and you also share a vision for like a different institution for artists to thrive. And also it's inclusive leadership and diversity. Like I'm not the only person. If you have a team that you belong to, why aren't you listening to someone else's perspective on your team to have input on how you present work to the public? I don't believe that you have to rely on me because I have things that I'm into aesthetically with art, and then I'm not really big on technique. I'm really big on content and the message. And then I have a colleague like Margaret, who's really, she is all about the sequence of storytelling. She has a photography background. So she's all about the sequence of work and how you like tell your story through your work and how we install it. And then there's Delana. Delana is always keeping us, you know, ethically like ethically like approachable in our like and how we tell the public to come visit us. The public relations is like how we talk to our community is very important, like relatable. Like Delana speaks that language for Hill Street. And then we have Akiko who like sits down and goes through all our like wording and keeps us accountable there, and and listens to the artists when they write artist review, because we're all on the same page. We all believe in the work that's happening, but I can't be the only person who tells those stories. And also, you know, I'm not the only one to tell those stories, but I can't be the only person leading this because that's impossible. Every ship has multiple people like steering it. It's not just one person. I don't believe I'm a captain. I'm just a vessel. I don't know what else to say. Like everything's about relationships. Like when I work with artists, it's really about being transparent. Like I don't always agree with artists. They don't always agree with me, but we make sure that we create a space where they could say they don't, and we work it out. And that goes into like the work. Every experience that we have goes into that work. It's really a relationship because the whole purpose of our space is creating a safe space, but not just that, like also talking about issues that have never not been discussed before, but remind folks like, hey, this is still happening. We still need solutions. This is personally affecting folks in our community. And art is just one language that allows us to connect those dots and have those conversations with our visitors. And also, I just, one more thing is just autonomy. It's so difficult to have autonomy in the art world. There's so many admin rules to making sure a show happens. There's so much academia involved with research. It's very difficult for artists to have autonomy when you have, other institutions that are always comparing you to to an artist of the past. And like I said before, like no one is special. There's always whenever you have the same problems of like environment, economic, like nothing is special. So when we keep comparing artists and young artists to the past, how are we giving them the space to practice their autonomy and to find their own personal message through or giving them the space to be experimental and be okay if they don't like how it turned out. I believe creativity has to be experiment. So again, like my couture practice with artists is very relationship based, it's in community based, and it's also just, it is a little DIY because hey, we're poor. Poor people have to be DIY. That is just the reality. And when you start like building institutions, you have to decide who's going to sit at that table with you because it can jeopardize your freedom to be creative. And they'll start projecting what they believe is best to tell your stories. And so, autonomy is so important for artists and curators and art leaders and organizers. And that requires to be in practice in community with folks who agree with your same principles and direction and vision for art. So yeah, and a lot of artists that exhibit with us after their show, sometimes they decide to continue in that direction, or sometimes they're like, hey, I want to like try a different medium, or I want to like take a risk. And the work will still have the same content, but they got all of that out to the point where they no longer have to over talk about what their work is. They could just make the work. And so there's this freedom that happens once you like have your first solo show, and then you get to come back and you're trusted and you trust the institution to create more work. And also you have this freedom where you no longer have to like remind yourself why you're there, or like you got rid of those institutional rules. It's just second nature for you to create the work that you want to work. I'm hoping that the artists that I work with can get all the stuff out that became a barrier to their art creation.